One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. We are talking about one of my favorite topics today. I mean, of course, it's about podcasting, but we are going to be talking about being a successful podcast guest. Yes, we've talked about this many times on the podcast, that in order to grow your show and get in front of more people, you have to be strategic about getting on other podcasts in a way that's going to put you in front of the right audience at just the right time with just the right message. So I cannot wait for you to listen to today's interview. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? Okay, so we have a special guest today that is going to talk about making profitable connections using your podcast, but also getting in front of the right audiences at the right time with the right message. So Kristin Molenaar is an entrepreneur enthusiast who lives by the mantra, work less and make more. She enjoys helping entrepreneurs ditch vanity metrics for true profitable connections. She's the CEO of Yes Boss, an agency that helps entrepreneurs increase their visibility and credibility through profitable podcast guest features. And we had so much fun in today's conversation. It kind of took a bunch of twists and turns, and I hope that you learn more about guesting on podcasts. So here's my interview with Kristin. All right, Profit Podcast listeners, I'm so excited to bring you Kristin on the show today. So welcome to the show, Kristin.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Yes, this is going to be so much fun. I am always excited to talk to someone who's in the podcasting and marketing space that doesn't do exactly what I do, because I love to learn from other people. Everybody has their own style, their own way of doing things. So before we really dive into what it is that you and your company do, can you share a little bit about how you got into the online business space in general, because we all know it hasn't been around forever and it hasn't always been an opportunity to serve people this way. So tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, so my story kind of begins back in 2014 when I left my last regular job. So I'd always worked for small businesses and loved working, but I was in a situation in 2014 where, while I loved my job, I had a boss that wasn't so great and I needed to get out, and I saw an opportunity to be self-employed. So I jumped out in late 2014. And my mindset was that because I was a really great employee, I would be a really great entrepreneur. Like I really came in like guns a-blazing, tons of confidence to have it smashed, like completely smashed right away. So for the first 14 months, I really struggled. I called myself a starving entrepreneur, like a starving artist, to kind of explain it to people. And really, I was trying to take what I did in corporate, which was doing consulting and brand management for the beauty industry for like cosmetic brands. I tried to do the same kind of thing on my own. And the reality was I knew nothing about entrepreneurship. I knew how to do all the things and be working my way up a ladder, proving to people that I knew so much. I didn't know much about leadership. I didn't know how to work smart, didn't know any of that stuff. So 14 months after living with my in-laws and feeling like just so financially frustrated, I still didn't want to sacrifice my freedom, because the real motivating force for me was having freedom. Like I didn't want it being dictated to me when I had to work, where I had to work, all those things. So I had learned a little bit about the virtual assistant industry. And so I decided, you know what, I can go out and I can get a client that way. And so I got my first virtual assistant client and quickly realized that I didn't want to do the stuff he was asking me to do. So I grew a virtual assistant agency, because when you have a virtual assistant agency, you can take on clients doing all kinds of different things and outsource them to a team. So I grew that team. So we got our first client in 2016, and by 2018 we had done our first $100,000 within like a 10-month span, and I had really built the business to run like a well-oiled machine. It was something I'm really proud of, actually, going from that like struggle position to figuring out how to do something that functions well. And what I realized was that I wanted to get out and start talking to people about what I had seen, both in like my entrepreneurial struggle, some of my entrepreneurial success, and now like all the clients that we were seeing as well, because I had a back seat in what was working well for clients and what wasn't working well. And oftentimes the people that on the surface you would think things were going really well, behind the scenes they weren't. And then on the surface, the ones that you're like, really? Is that business really making money? We're doing very well. So I was seeing lots of different perspectives and I wanted to start talking about it. So I told my team, I want to start talking on podcasts. In my mind, this was like the first step to just kind of doing like some public speaking. It felt like a lower barrier to entry. I didn't have to leave my house. I still had a lot of freedom, yada, yada. Well, 6 months later, after I, proposed this new idea to my team, I had not pitched myself for a single podcast. Here comes the mindset junk again. I had a lot of imposter syndrome. I had built I had built my business with zero social media presence and a really bad website. They just weren't the things that I needed to be successful. And I kept thinking in the moments when I would consider pitching myself that nobody was going to think that I was successful because of what they saw online. So fast forward 6 months, I hadn't pitched anybody, but I wanted to get on podcasts. And my team finally said to me, Kristin, how about we just pitch for you, because you're obviously not getting it done. So my team came to my rescue, and very quickly they started booking me on podcasts. Like they didn't have those reservations, that imposter syndrome that I did. And so I started going on podcasts. Well, I don't know if it was 6 months, 9 months after starting the podcasting, starting to be a podcast guest myself, what I realized is it had become our most effective marketing strategy. This was now driving clients to our business. So it wasn't what I intended to do. Like I intended to just kind of be philanthropic, I think is the best way to explain it. I just wanted to kind of share what I knew with people to kind of help them. But what ended up happening is it started attracting people to my business. And so we then started doing the same thing for our clients, getting them booked on podcasts because we thought, we can't keep this a secret. This is really amazing. And after finding out that it was an effective strategy for our clients too, finally, I was able to niche down my services. I had wanted to do that, but I didn't really know how I wanted to do that. And then it became, you know what? This is the only thing we should be doing for our clients because we control the results. We can make promises. Well, not control the results, but we can make promises that we believe in. We know how to get the results for our clients. And so this became the only thing we do, went from virtual assistant agency to just straight getting people booked on podcasts, helping them increase their visibility and credibility in late 2020. So around fall of last year. So that's all we do now. That's kind of my progression story.
I love it. I love it. It's so interesting because I love to hear how people get into podcasting. And I think at the end of the day, it usually comes down to people using their best asset. And that's either their personality, their voice, their message, or a combination of all three of those. And I love that your team was just like, just let us take over. Like, you're not getting it done. Give us the reins. We'll make this happen. Because I think that you're a fantastic guest. And I think that being able to show up on other people's podcasts, and we're going to talk about this in a second, because Kristin, when she reached out to me and was like, can we talk about the ways people are doing podcast guesting wrong? I was like, yes, absolutely. Because everybody wants to talk about ways that it works and ways that it's fantastic and it's amazing. And I've talked so many times on this podcast about podcast guesting because I'm a firm believer that it is the fastest way to grow your show, to get your name out there and to have a bigger influence in your market. But so I want to go back to what you were doing before. So before you niche down, because this is really where a lot of our podcasters struggle. They want to talk to everybody. They want to serve everybody. And I think that it comes from a good place in their heart, but also their market is way too broad and it's hard to really niche down. So what were those actual feelings whenever you said, okay, we're not going to do, whether it was social media management or website, whatever the other things services you were providing? What did it feel like when you finally said, nope, we're just going to go all in with podcasting?
Well, it felt pretty stinking scary, to be completely honest. I remember just a few weeks ago reading what I had written in my journal. And I wrote in my journal, I think we're going to start doing podcast booking for clients. But I think we're going to need to add guest blogging. And I think we're going to need to add all this stuff that was under a PR umbrella, because I didn't think podcast booking was enough. And it was interesting to kind of reflect on that, on what I was feeling at the time and thinking that I need to broaden, okay, I can have this as the base, but I need to add other things because no way we can make enough profit off of this. But I went back to the numbers. Okay. And I think a lot of people don't do this. And this is something that I feel so passionate about is we think that we can't get enough business by niching down. But what I did for me was so there are two ways that I attract people into my business. I do podcast guesting and I'm on LinkedIn, kind of on LinkedIn. As of right now, I haven't posted in a while. So I'm lackluster on LinkedIn. But regardless of that, what I had to think about was what does a successful business look like to me with just doing podcast booking? How many clients do I need to have? Say the number, I don't remember what the number was at the time, but say the number is 100. I would need 100 clients and I would be blown away, happy with my business. This would be a home run success for me. And then I had to think about, are there 100 people that are hanging out in the two places that I'm hanging out? So either listening to podcasts or on LinkedIn. Are there 100 people that need what I'm offering? And in this specific way, really dialed in. And when I thought about it that way, it was well, yeah, of course there are 100 people that need what I have to offer. So then my brain, because I think very logistically, it's well, then I'm not going to add anything else because I can get really good at getting people on podcasts, really know my space, really know how to provide value in this area, or I can dilute the knowledge that I'm getting for myself and trying to pass on to my clients by learning other things. Nope. I need to remember the math. 100 clients would be wildly successful. I know I can do that. All right. I'm just putting my head down and I'm going to resist the temptation to widen up again.
This is so, so helpful because I think that there are a lot of people listening right now that are like, oh, she's right. Like, because I think that like you feel this in your gut when you're like, this is what I'm supposed to do. But then like your head, your brain is telling you like, no, 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 no. That's too risky, or that's too, it's not a big enough market. There's not going to be enough of an audience to do that. Like you should hold back a little bit and not really take that leap. And I think it's the same way for people listening that have this podcast idea that they're just like, oh, no, let's go a little bit bigger. But the word dilute, right? Like you dilute your message, you make it just more wishy-washy, and you don't like put that stake in the ground. So I love the behind the scenes because it is scary. Like I'll be totally honest. I went from a podcast that talked to mostly female entrepreneurs, and then we just went down to podcasting, and I was like, what's going to happen? But like you said, if you have 100 people listening to your message, if you can reach 100 clients, if you can find those people that are just right for you, that's where the magic is. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, this conversation is so good. It gets me so fired up. It's so fired up because niching down, I think, is one of the scariest things that you can do as a podcaster and as an entrepreneur. So I love that you shared that.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to what we initially were talking about, because Kristin sends me an email and she's like, I want people to know that there is a more effective way for people to guest on podcasts, but also to be a profitable podcast guest. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, what I'm going to say, I think, is something that probably people won't expect because it doesn't have a whole lot to do with podcasting. And this is at the root of pretty much everything that you're doing. So all of your PR efforts, all of your marketing efforts, all of your networking efforts. So, I mostly see being a podcast guest as networking, but it fits under the umbrella of all three. So basically, if you want to grow your business, right, we'll put it under this category. If you want to grow your business, you have to know what it is you sell and who you're serving. So it's kind of what we already talked about, right? But this is one of the big reasons why when people go on podcasts as a guest, it's really ineffective for them. And so I'll give a specific example. I have a friend who is in the copywriting space, and because she's such an amazing copywriter, she really is. She has really great social media following. She has a really great email list. People follow her. Like she has a following. Unfortunately, though, she knows that she's a copywriter, but she's never gotten very specific about what kind of copywriting she sells because it's still way too broad. People don't know if are they hiring her to write sales pages? Are they hiring her to write emails? Are they hiring her to write, launch sequences? Are they hiring her for social media? They don't know. So she has a lot of people following her, but not a lot of people buying from her. This is what happens on podcasts. So somebody will go on a podcast and they're talking way too general. And so what I say to our clients is the most important thing that you need to be able to do is what by the time you've hung up on that podcast conversation, the podcast host needs to be able to know what you do so fluidly that there's a person that pops up in their mind. Like, oh, I need that. Or, oh, that person that I know needs that. Or, my audience needs that. Or there's a specific person that's tied to what you do so they know exactly how they would refer you. And a lot of people are missing that. And so when we work with our clients, I feel like a lot of us getting them PR ready is we write a bio, when we write some talking points, it forces our clients to get really specific so that we can tee up questions that provide our clients with the opportunity to talk about case studies, to talk about some of their experiences, and it gets really specific on what they do. So how they're making money in their business and who's buying from them. Because without those things, sure, you're providing valuable information and you might be a really good podcast guest, but you're not in the end going to be profitable. And so it literally will just be a philanthropic thing that you're doing.
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
I love this so much. And I have to say, because, I get a lot of different guest pitches and people that reach out to me and say, I'd love to talk to your audience. I'd love to be, a part of what you're doing. I think it's fantastic. But exactly what you just said, I don't like to bring people on to the podcast unless they have a very specific thing. Like Kristin came to me and said, people are ineffectively guesting on podcast, and I want to talk about why. And that is really what drew me to hear your message and to listen to what you were going to share. Because, I've had so many, we're not going to get into bad pitches. Okay. That's not what we're doing here today. I've had this conversation with many, many peers in the industry, and I'm just like, bad pitches, we're not going to call people out. We're not going to do that. But I can tell you that I get pitched all the time with, it's just not on point. It has nothing to do with the audience. And if I brought them on, I'm like, I don't even know what questions I would ask you, because you are so far removed from what I would talk to my audience about. So I 100% agree with everything that you're saying. You've got to know who you serve and how you can serve them. Yeah. But I want to ask, do you have to really give your clients some tough love if they're like, no, I don't want to get, because I've seen people say, oh, I want to be on this podcast and it's so amazing. And they give you the top 10 of all the podcasts. And you're like, hang on, to tell me what that, what that would look like. If I came to you and said, I want to be on X, Y, and Z podcast. And you're like, what would that conversation look like?
So when I decided to niche down into getting clients on podcasts, I didn't realize just how much coaching was going to be involved in my new niche. And I actually sent an email to my business coach yesterday that said, does every business have the questions that they have to answer every single day? Is this something that everybody experiences? Because I deal with the same things every day. The big one for me is I want on the big podcasts. I want on the biggest shows. And I think that this provides opportunity for me to share another kind of highlight about podcast guesting that I think that everybody needs to hear. And that is that if you are looking at being a podcast guest just specifically for the perks of PR or the perks of marketing, you're doing it wrong. Okay, so I think that in general, people see this as a marketing or a PR strategy. And so people come to me and they say, I want to fill my email list. I want to work on this launch. I want to do this, that, and the other thing. And I say, okay, that's great. But the most effective way to do those things is actually to treat being a podcast guest as a networking strategy. So I see this as networking on steroids. And we have seen this time and time again that the most profitable thing about being a podcast guest is meeting other people who share very similar business philosophies, who there's synergy in what they do and what you do. That is when the profitability happens even beyond the recording and even beyond the release of the podcast. So what I've found is the bigger podcasts that you want to go after, the people in those categories. So the podcast hosts, say you're able to get on one of their episodes. So for me, I was able to get on an episode a podcast where the guy has 50,000, I think. Well, when I was on it, I think it was 30,000. His email list was 30,000. And then there was another one I was on that this guy has millions of downloads. In my mind, I was thinking, oh, this is the time where I'm going to experience that one hit wonder, right? Here's what happened. The people that have the bigger podcasts and that they're just focused on those numbers, they don't oftentimes have a lot of room in their network for you. Also, your episode is going to get published, yes, but it's going to get promoted once. Versus people that are more at your level or more at the, I even like being on newer podcasts. So people that are in the beginner phases or in the medium-sized audience phases, I like them because they are more interested in getting to know their guests and getting value from their guests, and they have more room in their network for somebody like me as a guest, the chances that they have somebody in their network that already does what I do, where I'm now a competitor for that spot in their network, the chances go down a whole lot. And I feel like people in this space, like more, let's just say, like, not the big wigs that everybody's trying to go after, like not them, those have been the more profitable relationships for me, because I'm able to get in and establish relationships with those people. So I realized you asked me one thing and I like kind of answered it and then like dovetailed into something else, but I was like, I have to say this.
This is so good. This is so good because I love like the behind the scenes. Like this is my, like, and my audience knows me. Like I love a good behind the scenes story, or almost like, it's almost like an experiment, if you will. It's like, this is what everyone thinks is like the shiny object, like the holy grail of what we're all going after, right? To be on this one top podcast. And then, like you said, everything's going to change overnight if I could just get on their show. But the reality is you're probably not going to have a very tight-knit connection with the host, simply because you're usually dealing with their team too. You're not going like Kristin and I were going back and forth in email. We had to reschedule one time because I was sick last time we tried to, get connected. So there is a lot of actual connection that happens behind the scenes before Kristin and I ever met and like are actually having this conversation here now. So I do agree that I think that it's a great way to build your network and establish it. Starting a podcast can be super overwhelming. How do I know? Well, because I've been there. I have been in your shoes. If you are just now in the creation stage of getting your podcast up and running, then I invite you to check out Profit Podcasting. This is my digital program that teaches you all the ins and outs of how to start, launch, and market your podcast. I want you to go check it out and see if it's going to be the right fit for you. If you're looking for a way to understand exactly how podcasting works, you want to know how to create content, how to launch your podcast, how to get it on all the players, but most importantly, how to tell people about it without feeling like you're alienating your friends, your family, your neighbor. Like, I want you to go check out Profit Podcasting. So go to crystalprofit.com/course to learn more about Profit Podcasting and to enroll today. crystalprofit.com/course to check out more. Okay, let's get back to today's episode. But I want to ask, this is totally a nerdy question, but it's what I do. It's just what I do. So if you were to have someone that has let's say a large Instagram platform versus a large email list versus a platform that has lots of downloads, is there a way that you would still approach each one of those in the same way, or would you take a different approach? And I know that we don't always know these numbers, right? Like, if someone's probably not going to share it with you, but I don't know, like, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I don't have a direct answer, but I can tell you what my approach is to how I like look at a partnership opportunity or try to figure out what I want to do with somebody. The number one thing that I ask after we end a recording, and I'm going to ask you this, and then I'm going to laugh about the fact that I asked about it during the recording, is how can I be a valuable connection for you? So I think that when there's a synergy between me and a guest, we both are going, I think our audiences really need to hear one another and what we have to offer. Or I'm thinking like, I need what this person that's interviewing, or my audience, my community needs what this podcast host is offering, or vice versa. And so I think that my approach has been just to have more organic conversations about those things. Now, there are my favorite ways to partner with people. I'll tell you that. They're my favorite ways. I'm always looking for evergreen opportunities. One of the things that I tell our clients to look for is, how do you get in front of the paid community of the person that has just interviewed you? Because I have found that there's a big difference between the people that consume podcast episodes and the people that are in paid communities. The people in paid communities, or like clients of the podcast host, they have already proven that they open their wallet to invest. People just listening to a podcast, They don't necessarily. Like the nature of a podcast is they are consuming free content. So how can we take this conversation that provides free value? How can we take this and generate an opportunity to get in front of an audience that's even smaller? So I think some people wouldn't look at it because it's a smaller audience, but it's a paying audience. And that's when the real profit starts to generate. So for me, it's not always on that first touch point, but what's that second touch point? And I'll throw out one of the specific ways that we are doing partnerships with people, because I think that I don't know that I've ever heard people talk about this, and it might just kind of give some people some creative ideas. What we are doing is we're finding people. So for us, like our application is people in podcast production or teaching others how to be in the podcast space. A lot of people like you, Crystal, are talking to people about like, you need to be a podcast guest. And so we come in and we say, is there a way that we can add an email into your automated sequences, stuff that's already going out, the stuff that you already have processed and systemized that you don't have to touch anymore? How can we get an email in there that lets people know if they want to dig into this topic a little bit more, that they can come to us? So I'm looking for, and this can apply to a lot of businesses, how can you kind of add value to the automated systems that the other entrepreneur, the podcast host, already has in play, so that it's no additional work for them to talk about you, but it's just a value add that doesn't cost them any time. Does that make sense?
This is so smart. I'm just like, this is genius. And I haven't heard anybody else talking about this. So like y'all, Kristin's giving away some trade secrets here that like, oh my gosh, this is so good. And it's so smart because when you said that about the automation and something you're already doing, the first thing I thought of as a business owner is that's one less thing I have to do. Like that is it, like literally went through my mind. It's like, oh, that would be so nice. Like if I didn't have to, do one thing that week, or, whether it was, generating another piece of content or having something that was perfectly aligned with where my audience is, and this would benefit them, this would serve them, but it also wouldn't feel like something spammy. Like we're not like trying to do like a clickbait type thing, anything like that. So that's really interesting. I haven't heard anybody doing that. So yeah, I'm totally on board with this. That's really exciting. Like I'm like, we're going to have to talk more about this like off air whenever we're done, because this is so, so good. But I want to go back to what you were saying is it all goes back to value. Mm-hmm. And I love that you're focusing so much because I mean, as a host, we can see right through when people are just like, I just like almost like remove the host out of it. I just want to get to your audience. Like it's almost like they're like weaseling their way into like your interview just to get to the audience. But I love how you're spending so much time helping the host make their job easier. Yep. And I think is that one of the values that y'all have at your business?
The way that I say it is we've got to deliver right from the pitch. We've got to deliver an episode up on a silver platter to the podcast host. So what I want to do for me and my clients is the guest has got to make the podcast host life easier. So it starts with talking points. Like you've talked about one of my talking points, how I talked about why people are an ineffective podcast guest. To me, it was like, hey, Crystal, I could produce an episode on this topic. This is the exact thing. If you wanted, you could name it this exactly. Do you want to have that conversation? To you, the question in your mind is either yes. The answer is yes or no. It's no longer, okay, cool. Thanks for all this information. What the heck is the episode about? That we want to avoid right from the get-go, because podcast hosts are busy people. All the logistics behind doing a podcast, there are a lot of logistics. You have a lot of things that you're already planning. You're planning your solo episodes. You should not have to plan an interview episode. We, as the guests, need to tee it up on a silver platter. The next thing is realizing what the podcast host's objectives are. And your objective is to provide valuable content. What I've learned is usually as much actionable content as possible for your audience, because then your audience wants to hear from you more. Like the idea is to get people to keep listening to your podcast, to like listen to more episodes and get involved in what you're doing in your community. So my goal has to be in alignment with what your goal is in order for you to see me in a positive light. And that is my overarching goal, is how do I get the podcast host to like me?
Yes.
It sounds so funny to say it, but like, how do I get the podcast host to like me? Because that is when this relationship goes beyond just a recording. If somebody actually likes me, that's when they put more effort into promoting the podcast or inviting me into other things. But I've got to be thinking about like, okay, so when I'm talking, I have to talk about specifics. I cannot be guarding trade secrets, because here's the reality about that. There are no trade secrets, doesn't exist anymore. Anybody can Google what I do, but I want to show up and talk about all the things that I do in a way that if the person listening wants to do it by themselves, that's great. But that also weeds out the people that want to do it for themselves. And then I attract people that want it done for them. So there's a lot of kind of dynamics going on here. But the overarching thing is like, my objectives have to be aligned with the host. My goal is for you to like me at the end of the day and not for you to feel like I showed up to use you. That's awful. That's really bad networking.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you said like anybody can Google. Okay. So first of all, Kristin's making it sound like it's super easy to do what she does. So let me clarify for those of you that are like, oh, maybe I should have a podcast guesting agency. Y'all, anybody that does what Kristin does, it is hard work if you do it right. And by hard work, I'm saying you can't just blind pitch thousands of podcasts and say, oh, we booked like, half of them. No, that is not how it works. I feel like that's kind of a murky like area that people don't really understand, is they think that, oh, I can just, hire an agency and they're just going to, write up a bio, like what you're talking about, like write up a bio and do something. And then it's just like, oh, we're just going to send this to thousands of people and they're all going to say yes. And they're all going to love me and all that. So I want to talk about what it's like from the time that you first sit down with a podcaster, or maybe it's not even someone, because I know we have a lot of people listening that are like, I don't even really want to create my own podcast. I actually want to learn more about guesting. So if they were to come into your sphere and they're like, Kristin, I'd love to work with you, what does that actually look like?
Okay, so we have two different paths that we take our clients on, but they all start at the exact same place. It all starts with what we call PR prep. So I have been getting on the phone. I'm still doing this with all of our clients right now because it's my absolute favorite thing in the world to do. But we're doing strategy calls with all of our clients. And on a strategy call, I'm going to really grill you about what do you do? What's like the secret sauce of what you do? What's your methodology? Tell me all about your methodology and don't leave it all out. Who is it that you are serving? So what kind of clients are we going after? And from that information and from that strategy call, what we're doing is writing a specific bio for you, writing talking points for you, and coming up with a specific research strategy. Because I think what people also don't realize is finding the right podcast has a lot to do with using the right research strategy. I've heard from a lot of people on the other side of the mic that they get pitched by people that have zero relevance to what they do. And that to me is like, yeah, because they don't know how to do research, because this would not happen if you knew how to do research.
Oh, I can like, yes, and yes, like 100%, no research done whatsoever. Go on. Yes.
Yeah. And that just makes you look really bad. Like that's gonna, if you do that too many times, people might start talking about you. So like, please don't do that. Okay. So from there, our clients really choose who they want to go out and pitch them. So everybody gets a specific pitch. We write that for all of our clients. We will not work with anybody whose pitch we don't write. And I'll say this, the reason is because we had a client one time that was gung-ho that her pitch was great. Her PR agency had written it for her, which is another interesting thing because I've just recently started doing training with PR agencies because this is totally different. Podcast space is totally different than what they're used to. That's an aside. That's irrelevant. So anyways, this client came in and she was like, I have my pitch. I want you to send it. We reluctantly said, okay, fine. I think my team said it. I hadn't looked at it. If I had looked at it, I would have known better. Whatever. We went for it. The client was insistent. We want to make the client happy. We were getting less than 3% response rate on all of our pitches sent. So we had found these great fits for her. And out of 100 people, 3 people were responding to us, not even booking her, but responding to us. That's awful. And that doesn't sound all that profitable on a fulfillment level for me. So I was like, wait a second, we've got to investigate this. This is terrible. We went in and rewrote her pitch, and right away with the very first batch of pitches that we sent out, we got a 12% response rate. So we 4 times improved the rate of response we were getting on our pitch. This tells me just how important it is to get your pitch right. Okay, so now we can move on. So phase 1 is that PR prep, getting that pitch right, making sure we're setting you up so that you stand out to the right people so you can get on the right shows. The next part is actually getting you booked. And this is where things differ. We have some clients that come to us and they say, you know what, I just need it done for me. And we offer a completely done for you service. So for those clients, they are giving us a link to their calendar. We're putting them on their calendar and they're literally showing up for the interviews. It is like totally hands off. We do it all for them. We have other clients who either have a VA or they intend to get a VA. We don't typically suggest people do this themselves because it's not necessary. Honestly, it's not necessary to do it yourself. So what we're doing is we're training your internal VA how to do all the pitching for you. We've also partnered with a virtual assistant agency that we will help you bring on a VA and we'll teach that VA how to do the pitching for you. You know, if clients want to do it themselves, that's fine. We usually just say like, you shouldn't be doing this yourself. Your zone of genius is sharing your genius, not getting yourself booked. And I personally have found that when you've got it on your own shoulders, it is easily the thing that goes to the back burner because any mindset, like problems that you have, like any feelings of insecurity are going to crop up like crazy during this process. So I usually suggest having somebody else do it. So that's the second phase is either, you know, done with you bookings where we're helping somebody on your team do it or done for you bookings where we're totally doing it. And the last phase, and this is something that I have added into all of our programs because frankly, our clients have needed it, and that's coaching from me. So we have content that we provide to our clients that is everything from like, how do you have a conversation with a podcast host after you're done recording? Like, what kind of opportunities do you look for? How do you leverage this relationship so that one booking means like, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 additional opportunities on the back end? What does that look like? Because what I've found is like, I'm a natural relationship builder and I've been able to, in hindsight, look back and see the strategies that I was using. But because this is so natural to me, I didn't realize that other people didn't do it. And so I'm teaching that to our clients so they can experience all of those same benefits that I have by being focused on that relationship building.
This is so good. And I think it's so helpful for people to just understand, because I think that there's a lot of people in our audience that are either solopreneurs, like they're trying to do things on their own, or they have a VA that maybe they haven't thought about, oh, this is a way that I could have my VA help me, or I could hire this out totally to an agency. And I think that just hearing how things work on the back end kind of like it pulls back the curtain of Oz, right? Like where you're not just like, what actually goes on back there? Because I don't even know. And it's overwhelming to even think about it. So I love how you just broke it all down step by step. But I want to add on one thing to everything that you said. And I know you're totally going to say 100%. The magic is in the follow-up. Not just that first pitch that you send out, because Kristin actually, and I don't even know what happened. Y'all, I'm so bad about my email. That's a whole other story for another day. But Kristin had sent me an email and then she had followed up with me. And I was like, oh my gosh, like you're perfect for my audience. And I had missed her first email. And so I just want to reiterate, like, do you totally agree? Like how often do you see it's like not just that first like one time email that you send out?
Yeah. And I have to tell my team, even my team, you know, one follow-up actually isn't even enough. And so I am constantly telling my team and our clients, like, until you hear no, it's not a no. So don't make those kinds of assumptions. Like podcast hosts especially are busy people. We can make the assumption that they're busy people because they are producing a podcast. That is not an easy undertaking. So you never know what's going on in somebody's inbox. And until you hear a no, don't make the assumption that it is a no. And it's just another reason why, like, I go like this. I'm covering my eyes right now. I'm like covering my eyes like, okay, team, you just do it. Like, because if I were to start looking at like how many people we've had to follow up with or like how many people didn't get back to us, I would start to have those feelings of insecurity again. But the cool thing about being like hidden from that as the entrepreneur is the only thing that I'm getting is that like confidence boost. Oh, somebody just said yes to you. I'm not seeing all the people that said no or like didn't respond. The only thing I'm seeing is all the yeses, which like keeps me fueled. And I'm like running on the high of like people wanting to feature me. So I guess that's another like benefit that happens with this. Yes, follow up. It's not a no until you hear no.
Oh, this is so good. So good. I feel like we could just talk about this. So like I'm learning so much as someone who, this is an aspiration for me. And, the second half of the year, it's going to be a big focus for me and my business. And so I love learning, like I said, from entrepreneurs, business owners who are way better at this stuff than I am. And I just appreciate everything that you've added to the conversation today. But I actually want to switch gears for a second because I have some rapid fire questions for you. So are you up for it?
Let's hear it.
Okay. So my first one is, and we have so many new podcasters that are in our audience. So what piece of advice would you give to someone who is brand new to podcasting?
I would say don't do it alone. I think that's advice that I give to a lot of people doing a lot of things. There are other people that have been where you are. And just because you're a beginner doesn't mean that you need to be in a silo alone. Like there are other people that want to help. And I think that you are not allowing other people to use their gifts by not asking them to help you. So to kind of like reframe asking for help, like it's also doing other people a favor to ask for their help because sometimes they like to help. So don't do it alone, and focus on network building. Network building is huge for any new thing that you're doing in your business. So whatever ways you can do that, whether it's getting involved in, a community of other people launching podcasts or getting out and being a podcast guest yourself.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Totally agree with that. So the next one I have is a 2-part question. And the first one is, what is a dream podcast you would love to be on? And who would be your dream podcast guest to interview?
I don't feel like I have a fancy answer for this. I genuinely just like connecting with other people that feel the same way about business as I do. So I don't have a dream podcast to go after. And that's why I think it's so surprising to me when clients come to me with the dream podcast in mind. The way that I consume podcasts is I like look for a topic and I use it like a Google search and then I binge somebody's podcast. But then once I've binged a bunch of episodes, I like move on to the next person. So for me, I feel like my answer is no one. I just want to connect. This to me is just like a way to connect with people who there's all kinds of like synergy because I don't want to do business alone. Like I have a team, but the opportunity to connect with other entrepreneurs that are leading their business, like that's what it's about for me.
I love it.
That's a non-answer. I guess I'm getting really good at those.
It's so good. It's so honest. I love it. We love honesty around here. Okay, my last question is, do you consider yourself a perfectionist?
No, I am not. No, I am a good enoughist.
Oh, that's a bumper sticker. We need that as a bumper sticker.
I've gotten really good at good enough. And I think that this goes back to my VA days of seeing what a lot of clients were doing. And the clients that were a perfectionist, they were the ones that looked beautiful online, but behind the scenes, they were just floundering. I have met so many people like that. And then my clients that were doing really fantastic, I would look at some of their, like, let's say websites, like I'll just focus there, just even their websites. And I would go, oh, wow, this is really rough. And they're so successful because it's not about how you look on the outside. I have found that the more I focus on like the connection aspect and like being of service and connecting with people and been all about relationships, like relationships are messy. There's not a lot of perfection in relationships. And that's what's helped me grow my business. So I think that perfectionism is a way to procrastinate, a way to validate that you're not good enough. For me, I think it's a pitfall. And I naturally am not a perfectionist. No, I'm good enough. I'm the good enoughist.
The good enoughist. I feel like that's a coffee mug, a t-shirt, and a bumper sticker that we need to have made immediately. That's so good.
That's so funny.
I love it. Well, Kristin, this conversation is so, so awesome. And if there's somebody listening, they're like, oh my gosh, I have to work with her. How do I get connected with Kristin? Where is the best place for everybody to learn more about you?
Yep. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. If you search for my name, because of the unique spelling of my last name, I'm the only Kristin Molenaar that shows up on LinkedIn. And our website is yesbossva.com, where you can learn more about our services. And we oftentimes have like some kind of free value that we offer to our clients or prospective clients. People just kind of check it out. You can check it out there.
Perfect. And we're going to have the links to everything in the show notes, as we always do. But Kristin, thank you so much for just hanging out with me today. Like, I felt like this was so much fun just to talk about podcast guesting, the do's and the don'ts, and the everything in between. So thank you so much for coming on the show today.
I appreciate you having me. I agree. It was a ton of fun.
So what did you think? Kristin was a pretty cool guest, right? Like, I loved connecting with her and having the conversations about guesting. Like, this is something that we've talked about many times on here. There's a reason why, because it is that important, from making sure that you're showing up as a great guest, but also making sure that you're making the right connections along the way, right? Like, we don't want you just pitching everybody that is out there that has a podcast and not doing your research, not really making sure that you are aligned with their audience, because at the end of the day, you could be wasting everybody's time, not just your time, but the host's time as well. And we don't want that to happen. So I hope that you want to learn more about Kristin and her company and all the incredible things that they do. So make sure you go check out our show notes, crystalprofit.com. Episode 248, crystalprofit.com/episode 248 is where you're going to find the show notes for today's episode. And if you are listening to this in real time, in April 2021, we are right in the middle of our review giveaway. It is starting next week, and it's going to be running from April 26th through April 30th. Y'all, we're going to have some incredible giveaways. Like, I am so dang excited. I'm fired up about it. So even though the review contest hasn't officially started, you can still go to crystalprofit.com/review to see how to enter, what to do, all the things, prizes, like all the fine print, everything you need to know is there. So go check that out. crystalprofit.com/review for all the details. But that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. We're so happy that you are here. I'm glad that you joined in today's interview with Kristin, because it was so good. So many awesome takeaways. Again, you can find the show notes at crystalprofit.com/episode 248. And as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, "Send Crystal a text message." And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, "Send Crystal a text message." And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.